Hello, everyone. Welcome to Self-Published Success, a show that highlights forward-thinking authors who chose self-publishing over traditional and found success doing so. My name is John Feldman, founder and CEO of Visionary Literary, and your host for today's show. Our guest today is Branch Isole. Branch is a poet, storyteller, and author of 22 books. He writes about having the strength of choice to change consequences and is known worldwide for contemporary short stories that reveal emotions and issues often experienced but not always voiced. As a podcast and talk radio on-air guest, Branch shares informative steps to build frameworks that support career, personal, and spiritual growth. Branch graduated from Texas State University, did postgraduate work at University of Houston, and holds a master's degree in theology from Trinity Bible College and Seminary, which is an adjunct program from Oxford University. He posts a thought for a day, short stories, and articles on his website, branchisole.com, and on YouTube. Branch, welcome to the show.
Hey, John, good afternoon. Great to be here.
Good, great. Well, we are glad to have you. Let's kick things off by just introducing the listeners to you, piggyback off of what I just mentioned, and tell us more about your background and what got you into writing.
Sure, great question to start with. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. I went to college, got out of college, got into corporate America, spent about a decade and a half in sales and marketing with large companies. After that, I sort of went on a journey, the movie 7 Years in Tibet. I left the corporate world and I just started experiencing, a lot of different situations and a lot of people and spent about a decade wandering and learning. And after that, I decided that I needed to write a book, not about my journey or anything, but about what I had discovered about the old me versus the now me. And so that started my writing career. I never thought of myself as a writer. I was an average student. I never read a complete book until I was in the Army. So reading was not, one of my big passions. And the older I got, and when I decided to go back to school and get my master's in theology, I had gotten onto a spiritual path and was interested and motivated to learn more about, that balance in life, spiritual, the practical, the pragmatic. So that's what put me on that path. And I was compelled to write a book about spirituality and the world's religions. And I thought that would be it, and it wasn't. And I started writing short stories, and 22 books later, here we are.
So what was it? What was the one, I guess, moment that got you, that hooked you when you started writing and you were like, wow, I've got to keep this going? You have 22 books now, the poems, your website. What was it that?
Yeah, that's a nice question to ask. I don't get asked that very often. I wrote the book, and it's a nonfiction book. It's for seekers and searchers and fallen away Christians. That's the target audience. And so I thought, well, this will be it. And I wrote it and got it published, and started down that path. But the writing, I didn't have the writing bug. And one day I was sitting out, we were living in Hawaii, and I had a gazebo out on the water. And I was looking out at the Big Island across that 30-mile stretch of Pacific. And a thought occurred to me, if I was stranded at sea, if I was alone at sea in the middle of the ocean, what kinds of thoughts and fears, would I have? And from that came my first short story. And then it just started tumbling out that way, and I would get ideas. I pick up most of my writing ideas from my world by observation and overhearing conversations. Basically, those are my story triggers. So I just started writing, about the things that I experienced, not my own experience, but what I was seeing happening between people and situations. And that's where it came from. And so I wrote 18 fiction books. And then I came back to the nonfiction and have 3 other nonfiction books. So
Okay. Well,
that was sort of the writing journey.
yeah. Well, it started, the aesthetic there is beautiful. Thanks for painting that picture in Hawaii on a gazebo looking out onto the big island. I mean, that sounds like heaven, like any writer's dream is to have that gazebo and sit in that beautiful Hawaiian weather. But yeah, so 18 books, right? 18 fiction and 3 or 4 nonfiction, right?
Correct. Correct.
What which I mean, the balance says that you prefer fiction, right? But when you are writing, which do you prefer?
Wow, that's a good question. I like the fiction because what I'm trying to do is tell a complete story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a lesson or theme in as concise and brief presentation as possible. So I like that challenge. The nonfiction I'm compelled to write now because of my walk and my journey and where I'm at, the things that I'm trying to share with people. So it's not that I like one better. I'm actually ghostwriting a book right now for a young man. So, both of them charge me in a different way.
Yeah.
Which it's a great variety, to have where, well, I don't have to keep knocking out short stories or poetry. And so it's just a nice blend and it's worked out well.
Yeah, I agree. And as a both fiction and nonfiction writer myself, I have to say that the audience is typically a little bit more, um, I guess, easygoing when it comes to nonfiction. People are a little bit more blunt with their hatred for fiction. If they don't like it, they are very vocal about it. But at least with nonfiction, if you help 1 or 2 people, you can feel good about helping those 1 or 2 people. Whereas
Yeah,
fiction
exactly.
fiction reviews seem to be a little bit more harsh than nonfiction. Um, so talking on the nonfiction note, right? You said that you, I guess, have a lot to offer to provide. You were, before the call, you were talking about the fact that you've, I guess, had your career before this and you've done well. So what is it about the nonfiction book writing aspect that makes you feel like do you want to give back? Do you want to share your information? What really drives you to write that nonfiction?
Actually, both of those things. And you said it well. The nonfiction for me is telling someone else's story. Like I said, my blessed gift from the Lord above is I have a keen sense of observation. And, if you go into a coffee shop and you sit down and you are very, very still, not moving much at all, and you focus on what's going on around you, you can pick up conversations and you can watch people's mannerisms and their behavior and their reactions to whatever conversation, they're having. And a lot of those are keys and triggers, like I said, for my story. So the story may not be about somebody in a coffee shop, but whatever they're talking about or whatever I'm experiencing, in their mannerisms and things, triggers for me a story. So my story is about other people, basically, but I'm focused in on the lesson that can be learned from the situation. And also, like you said, sharing or giving back information in the story that will not only intrigue the reader, but will give them some identity with the characters and the situation. And so from that way, you mentioned it in the last thing you said, that story, their story, that's what fiction is about. People read fiction and they see themselves related to that story, not necessarily in the story, but they relate to that story on some level. And that's what fulfills them as a reader. So, I'm trying to give real life fiction to readers who will identify with what they're reading, and hopefully, they get something that they can take away then and use in their life, or, double check them, just something that they can learn very quickly that applies to them. And so that's the focus and the design of the story. The content, just comes from my interaction in my world. But, sometimes the focus is the protagonist is a male, sometimes it's a female, sometimes it's a grandmother, sometimes it's a 5-year-old child. So my characters, all of the things they're experiencing, all of my readers have experienced at some time or another, but they're vicariously able to see through the story, the lesson or the contact with them as the reader in their own life. And so that there's that sense of entertainment, there's that sense of release. So that's the idea, and that's the approach. I hope that they enjoy the story. It's like you said, some people hate it. I mean, I get emails that say, I love this story. And then 3 stories later, I hated that story.
Yeah.
So, but that's, for me, that's the ping pong ball. It keeps them reading, they read one they love and they go, oh man, I really like that. I didn't think, what was going to happen at the end happened. So they read on, down the line. And because they're all short stories, it's not, you don't get into the novel. And so they read very quickly, and, they can go down, oh, I want to find another one I love. And along the way, they run into one that really strikes a chord. And all of a sudden, man, I don't like this one. How did that guy know, that I was going through this? So, it's all about growth, both for the reader and for myself. Hopefully I've grown as a writer with the years. And that's my challenge, is, to keep growing and keeping up with the times. The lessons of life are all the same. They were the same 2,000 years ago as they are today. Right. But our lives are very, very different today. And so,
yeah,
the lessons have a lot more hard impact on us today, because we have so many other responsibilities going on in our lives. We don't have time to sit down and figure out, well, how can I be a reliable individual?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true too. And what you mentioned is how times are changing, and you see it in the way that books are formatted also. When 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was, long paragraphs, a lot of detail, but now the more white space on the page, the better. Your 1 to 3 sentence paragraphs, everything has to be taken. Just, we consume as humans information so much differently now. And when you mentioned the story form aspect, we learn from stories, and especially when it is nonfiction, when you're telling stories and putting the reader in scenarios that they wish to be in. For business books, for example, telling the story from some horrific accident or falling into bankruptcy, and how you were able to climb out of it. And as a new business owner, you read that and you can relate, and you think, wow, like this is something that probably could happen, but there's also a positive spin. I'm able to get out of it if it does happen. So yeah, definitely a big change in the way that we write today and the way that readers consume. So yeah, going back to you and just the number of titles that you've written, right? Writer's block, right? Everyone hears it. If you were sitting in Hawaii in a gazebo, maybe thoughts come a little bit easier, right? But how do you get over that age-old writer's block?
This is going to sound crazy, but I just don't give it any energy. When I'm compelled to write, I write. And my wife will say, where have you been all night? When I get a thought at night, I have to write it down. And once that happens, I collect them in my mind. And once I get to a handful, I know I've got to get up and start writing. So I do a lot of writing early in the morning. It's quiet. I have the whole place to myself. So I identify with writer's block, but when I have writer's block, I just don't worry about it. I know I'll be writing, I'll be spurred or triggered again soon to write something. I won't, succumb to it being something that has control over me. It just, so if I'm not writing, I'm not writing. I'm doing other things,
Yeah.
I raise chickens and I've got animals. And so I just occupy myself with other things. And in that time, because I'm not worried why I'm not writing, it allows me, mental freedom from writing. And that opens up my world again. And so it's just a cycle, writing, not writing, as opposed to writing and writer's block.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. One thing
I
too.
just I've learned not to go there. That's all, and that's an age and experience kind of thing.
Yeah. I took a master class with James Patterson, years ago,
Uh-huh.
and he said like he writes his outline and he's like, I don't have an aneurysm over it. I just write, and I'll go back and I'll
Yeah,
edit.
yeah,
So for any listeners that are struggling with that, I mean, I still struggle with it as much as I can sit here and
yeah.
say, give advice. I still struggle, but so again, going back to the number of titles that you've written, you've chosen to self-publish only. Have you tried traditional route? And have you tried
Mhm.
traditional at all?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, oh yes, yeah. My very first book, my foray was into what was called, I don't know what they're called now, but vanity press, where you
Okay.
pay someone, you submit the manuscript and they do all the legwork. My first book, God, I believe, was published that way. My first book cost me $2,500 to get 40 copies in my hand. And once I understood what the process was and all the steps, I thought, well, I can do this. So I started self-publishing, with the next book. And my cost for that book and every book thereafter was basically $250.
Big difference. So
Yeah, big difference. But I had to do all the work. I had to do all
yeah,
the legwork.
yeah,
And that was the struggle. When my first book, I had no idea, what the legwork looked like. And after that, I thought, okay, well, this is doable. They're doing it, so I can do it. I just have to learn the processes.
right. So for
But
the listen,
I hadn't anticipated a second book, so it wasn't like, gee, do I want to self-publish or traditional publish? Um, One book, you get it to somebody who knows what they're doing and gives you a book at the end of the process.
yeah, and then after the first book, you were like, you sat out on the gazebo again, and you thought, I have to keep writing. So now let me self-publish. So
Yeah.
for the
Well,
listeners,
almost.
what is just like your biggest piece of advice when it comes to self-publishing, something that can help someone who is right now in the dark and weighing their options where they want to go?
Can you handle rejection and disappointment?
Yeah, that's a big one.
We all have a dream and everyone has a story to tell. And lots of people tell lots of people, God, you should write a book. That's a great story. And they go, oh, okay, this is what I'll do. But that dream, like everything else, has a cost. And those costs, are extensive and they add up. And you have to be willing to address the hard facts before you ever go down the writing or the publishing path. You have to ask yourself a lot of questions, and you have to let other people ask you a lot of questions, because writing and publishing is a journey. It's a career. It's an occupation. It's a
It is.
life form of its own. Otherwise, you're writing a book and you give it to all of your friends and neighbors and family. Um, there's no in between in writing and publishing. You know the statistics, and they're similar to getting into pro sports.
Yeah.
Not many people are going to get to that level, and more than likely, not one of those people includes you. Okay, so what does that do to your ego before you even open the gate?
Yeah. Agreed. And luckily, this goes back
Yeah,
also to the way that we used to write and read, right? Like the way that we
exactly.
used to
Yeah.
publish was one way. Now things are just completely different. So the doors have been open. Everything seems to be changing. But regardless of the change, you are still knocking out stories. You're still putting up information on YouTube and on your website. Branch, where else can people find you and your work?
You just said it. YouTube and my website. That's got every link, that I've come up with, and every link that's been written or said about me is right there. So that's Google the name, or go to the website, or go to the YouTube channel, and
Okay.
you'll learn more about me and my writing.
Good. And that's Branch, Branch, Isole, ISOLE.com. I'll also put that in the description show notes. So excellent, Branch. Well, this has been a great conversation. Congratulations on your success, on that visual of being in Hawaii that remains inside your head and that is now in mine. Very much appreciated. For anyone listening, he's wearing a nice Hawaiian floral shirt, making me want to go sit on a beach somewhere. Um, so, Branch, again, thank you for your time. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, John. Best of luck, buddy.
All right. Thank you.